Picture a world at peace, a world unaware of the cataclysmic event that was about to shatter it, World War I. Imagine the calm before the storm, a time of relative tranquility, where global powers maintained a facade of peace while beneath the surface, tensions simmered, alliances shifted, and the stage was quietly being set for a conflict of unprecedented scale. In the early 20th century, the world was a chessboard of nations, each with its own ambitions, alliances, and fears. Europe was a tinderbox of nationalistic fervor and imperialistic desires. The major powers, Britain, France, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia, were locked in a delicate balance of power, each wary of the other's intentions. This was an era of empires where the sun never set on the British Empire, and the German Kaiser dreamt of a place in the sun for his burgeoning nation. In the east, the Russian Tsar ruled over vast territories, while the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires clung to their fading glory. Yet beneath this veneer of peace and prosperity, the drums of war were beating softly. Nationalism was on the rise, fueling unrest in regions like the Balkans. Economic rivalries intensified, and an arms race was quietly underway. The major powers were increasing their military capabilities, constructing dreadnoughts and fortifying their armies, each move heightening the sense of impending conflict. Amidst this, a complex web of alliances was being woven. The Triple Entente of Britain, France, and Russia stood against the central powers of Germany and Austria-Hungary. These alliances, intended to maintain peace, ironically, made the prospect of a large-scale war more likely. The world was like a coiled spring, wound tight with tension, ready to unleash a storm of unimaginable proportions. It was a time of paradoxes, a time of peace and preparation, a time of alliances and apprehensions, a time of calm before the storm. And so the seeds of conflict were sown, waiting for the right spark to set them ablaze. Enter the spark, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria. A seemingly isolated event, set against the backdrop of the early 20th century, but its ripples spread far and wide, engulfing nations in a war none were prepared for. It was June 28, 1914. Sarajevo. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and his wife Sophie were on an official visit. In the crowd lurked Gavrilo Princip, a member of the Black Hand, a Serbian nationalist group. A gunshot rang out, and the Archduke and his wife fell, their lives extinguished in an instant. The assassination sent shockwaves through the complex web of alliances, rivalries, and diplomatic entanglements that had come to define Europe. Austria-Hungary, backed by Germany, delivered an ultimatum to Serbia, a nation they believed was behind the assassination. But Serbia, supported by Russia, resisted, and with each passing day, the tension grew. It wasn't just a power play between Austria-Hungary and Serbia. It was a powder keg, a volatile mix of nationalistic fervor, imperial ambitions, and a tangle of alliances that were more fragile than they seemed. The assassination was the spark that ignited this powder keg, setting in motion a series of events that would soon spiral out of control. On July 28, 1914, a month after the assassination, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Russia, bound by treaty to Serbia, began to mobilize its forces. Germany, allied to Austria-Hungary, saw this as an act of war and declared war on Russia. France, allied with Russia, found itself at war with Germany. And when Germany invaded Belgium to outflank the French army, Britain, a guarantor of Belgian neutrality, declared war on Germany. In a matter of days, Europe, a continent that had known relative peace for nearly 40 years, was plunged into a war of unprecedented scale and devastation. A war that would redraw the map of the world, redefine nations, and forever change the course of human history. With the world plunged into war, the stage was set for some of the most brutal battles in human history. On land, at sea, and in the air, World War I was a theater of unprecedented destruction. Let's dive into the heart of the conflict, exploring some of the most significant battles that shaped the course of this global catastrophe. In the West, the Battle of the Somme stands out as one of the bloodiest confrontations in human history. The Allies, striving to break through German lines, launched a massive offensive in July of 1916. For 5 grueling months, men fought in the mud and the blood, utilizing the chilling technology of machine guns, tanks, and artillery. Yet, despite over 1 million casualties, the front line barely moved, underscoring the tragic futility of trench warfare. Meanwhile, in the east, the Battle of Tannenberg marked a pivotal moment in the war. In August of 1914, the German forces outmaneuvered and encircled two Russian armies, inflicting devastating losses. This victory not only boosted German morale, but also exposed the weaknesses of the Russian military, setting the stage for their eventual withdrawal from the war. At sea, the Battle of Jutland remains the largest naval battle and the only full-scale clash of battleships in the war. In May of 1916, the British Royal Navy and the German High Seas Fleet exchanged fire in the North Sea. Despite Britain suffering heavier losses, the German fleet never again risked a significant battle, granting Britain control of the sea lanes. And let's not forget the aerial battles. The advent of flight gave birth to a new form of warfare. Dogfights between planes, once a spectacle of daring and skill, quickly became deadly dances in the sky. These battles, each unique yet equally devastating, laid bare the harsh reality of World War I. The strategies and technologies employed resulted in unimaginable destruction and loss of life, forever changing the face of warfare. While soldiers fought on the front lines, the war was also being waged on the home front. War is not fought by soldiers alone. Back home, citizens played a crucial role in supporting the war effort. The very fabric of society was transformed as the gears of war economies churned, fueling the fight on far-off battlefields. Households felt the sting of rationing as the necessities of life were pared down to support the troops. Luxuries became a distant memory, replaced by a stark and unyielding austerity. Propaganda painted the airwaves and print media, stirring up fervor and unity amidst the dire circumstances. The war was not just on the front lines. It seeped into every aspect of daily life, an omnipresent shadow that shaped the era. Children collected scrap metal for munitions, families cultivated victory gardens to supplement food rations, and communities rallied together, their collective strength embodying the spirit of resilience. The home front was as much a battlefield as the trenches, with every citizen enlisted in service of the cause. As men left for war, new roles opened up for women, forever changing the societal landscape. World War I was a turning point for women, marking their transition from the domestic sphere to the public one. The war necessitated a shift in societal norms, with women stepping up to fill roles traditionally held by men. In factories across the globe, women donned overalls and boots, working tirelessly to produce ammunition and machinery vital to the war effort. Nursing, too, saw a surge of women volunteers. They provided invaluable care to soldiers, often under dangerous conditions and close to the front lines. Some women even served directly in the war, taking on roles as drivers, cooks, and clerical workers. The war was a crucible, forging a new identity for women, one that allowed them to contribute significantly to society beyond their homes. Their resilience and determination during these challenging times laid the groundwork for the women's rights movement. As the war raged on, one nation entered the fray that would tip the balance: America. Initially neutral, America's entry into World War I was a game-changer. The United States, under President Woodrow Wilson, had maintained a policy of neutrality since the war's outbreak in 1914. However, America's stance shifted following repeated German submarine attacks on U.S. ships and the infamous Zimmermann telegram, which proposed a military alliance between Germany and Mexico. In April of 1917, the United States officially declared war on Germany. America's entry into the conflict was significant, not only because of its military strength, but also its economic power. The United States began supplying the Allies with food, raw materials, and munitions, transforming the nation into the world's largest creditor. The American Expeditionary Force, led by General John J. Pershing, arrived in France in June of 1917. Comprised of fresh, well-equipped troops, the AEF played a key role in some of the war's most critical battles, including the Second Battle of the Marne and the Meuse-Argonne offensive. The infusion of American manpower and resources significantly bolstered the weary and depleted Allied forces. It wasn't all about the battlefield, though. Back at home, American factories were working overtime to produce the goods necessary for war. Women entered the workforce in large numbers, filling jobs left vacant by men who had gone to fight overseas. War bonds drives were launched to fund the war effort, and the entire nation was mobilized to support the cause. America's impact went beyond the war itself. President Wilson's 14 points, a blueprint for peace, reshaped the geopolitical landscape, emphasizing the principles of self-determination and collective security. Although not fully implemented, These ideals laid the groundwork for the establishment of the League of Nations, a precursor to the United Nations. With America's entry, the tide of war began to turn, leading to the eventual end of the conflict. The United States, once a nation on the sidelines, emerged as a major global player, forever altering the course of world history. The guns fell silent, the dust settled, and the world took a breath as World War I came to a close. The final chapters of this brutal conflict were as complex as they were consequential, marked by weary soldiers, faltering empires, and desperate attempts to negotiate peace. In the fall of 1918, the Central Powers began to crumble. The Ottoman Empire capitulated in October, followed by Austria-Hungary in early November. Germany, now standing alone and buckling under the strain of Allied offensives, was on the brink of collapse. German sailors mutinied in Kiel, sparking a revolution that spread like wildfire across the nation. The Kaiser abdicated, and a new democratic Germany emerged from the ashes of the old empire. Amidst this turmoil, the German government sought an armistice, a cessation of hostilities. On the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the guns on the Western Front went silent. World War I was over. Soldiers laid down their weapons and civilians across the world rejoiced. The cost had been unimaginable, with millions dead and even more wounded physically and mentally. But the end of fighting was not the end of the war. Now came the challenge of making peace. The victors gathered in Paris in early 1919 to decide the fate of the defeated Central Powers. The negotiations were fraught with tension, as each nation sought to protect its interests and punish the aggressors. The resulting Treaty of Versailles placed the blame squarely on Germany, imposing crippling reparations and territorial losses that would sow the seeds of future conflict. The war to end all wars, as it was optimistically called, had finally ended. But the end of the war was not the end of its impact. The aftermath of World War I would shape the world for decades to come. In the wake of World War I, the world was forever changed. The end of the Great War brought with it a new world order. The political map of Europe was redrawn, and many new nations emerged from the ashes of old empires. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in June of 1919, was intended to ensure peace. Yet, it sowed the seeds of resentment, particularly in Germany, burdened with war guilt and heavy reparations. The war had profound social consequences as well. Millions had died and millions more were wounded or displaced, altering the demographics of many nations. The shared trauma of war led to a collective questioning of established societal norms and values. Women, having proven their worth in the workforce and on the home front during the war, began demanding equal rights, leading to the rise of the women's suffrage movement. The world's economy also underwent significant changes. Europe, once the epicenter of global finance, was left devastated and indebted. Meanwhile, the United States, relatively unscathed by the war, emerged as an economic powerhouse. However, this newfound prosperity was short-lived, giving way to the Great Depression at the end of the 1920s. Perhaps most ominously, World War I laid the groundwork for another global conflict. The punitive terms of the Treaty of Versailles, coupled with economic instability and the rise of extremist ideologies, set the stage for World War II just 2 decades later. World War I was not just a war among nations, but a war that shook humanity to its core. It altered the course of history, reshaping the world politically, socially, and economically. The echoes of the Great War can still be heard today, a testament to its far-reaching consequences. World War I, a war that changed the world, a war that a century later still echoes in our history. In just 4 years, World War I reshaped the globe, altered the course of history, and left a legacy that still impacts us today. This conflict, born out of tensions and alliances, sparked a flame that engulfed nations, forever changing the landscape of the world. Key battles played out on sprawling fronts, testing the mettle of soldiers and the strategies of generals, while the home front was a battlefield of its own, with citizens grappling with the realities of a global war. Women stepped into roles previously unimagined, not just supporting the war effort, but shaping it. America, too, played a pivotal part, tipping the scales and bringing the war to its eventual end. Yet, the end of the war was not the end of its impact. The aftermath rippled across decades, influencing politics, society, and culture. Remembering World War I isn't just about remembering a war, it's about understanding the forces that shape our world, both then and now.